What do you call a ghost that's seen so frequently, local police have a nickname for it? And then we travel to Wisconsin to take a look at the story of a young man who enjoys taking long walks through the woods. But every so often, he stumbles across a disgusting sight. A half-eaten deer rotting in the forest. What could possibly be killing the wildlife in this area? And, more importantly, is this young man also on the menu? Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having tons of fun doing whatever you're doing out there in the world. I hope you're doing it with a big old smile. You're just like staring, you're just at work, you're listening to this podcast, you're just smiling. You're just standing in the corner of your workplace smiling. Sure, it's upsetting to everyone else that you work with, but it puts a smile on my face knowing that you're creeping other people out. But someone who never creeps anyone out, walking into Dead Rabbit Radio Command, everyone get on your feet and give it up for our legacy Patreon, David Lazaritis. Woohoo, yeah, wee, yay! He's all jumping up and down. He's kind of creepy now. He's jumping up and down, dressed up like a clown, doing the Pennywise dance. David, you're going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially through the Patreon, I totally understand. I really do. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. Also, Patreon members do get the episodes ad-free, so that is another benefit, and they get the Patreon Discord and all of that. David, we're really happy that you are our legacy Patreon supporter today. Let's go ahead and start this off. I'm going to go ahead and toss you... Where are we going again? What's free? Oh, yeah. Let's go ahead. I'm going to toss you the keys to the Dead Rabbit Dune Buggy. We're leaving behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Drive us all the way out to Kentucky. Bing, 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 bing. Dune Buggy taking off across America. We need to get some action figures, man. Wouldn't it be awesome? We just have a Jason. You have a Jason action figure, a Bigfoot action figure, a Hans Vermhat action figure with extra long arms, and all the vehicles. Wouldn't it be amazing? Talk about a pipe dream, right? The podcast is going great, but it's not going that well that people are like, oh, Mom, shopping at Walmart. Oh, they're all sold out of the Dead Rabbit vehicles. Here. You can get this Mungo Dick act. I already have Mungo Dick. So the next aisle's like, wait, what? What did that kid just say? It'd be awesome. It would be totally awesome. Like, retailers are, why are we carrying this stuff? What's a carpenter copter? Well, a man can dream. David, keep driving us out to Kentucky. We're headed to Bowling Green, Kentucky. The year is 1996. I'm telling you this story for two reasons. One, I find it pretty fascinating, too. To also point out how wrong I often am when I make broad proclamations. So let's go ahead and take a look at this story here. It's 1996. We're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. There's a mall in Bowling Green called the Greenwood Mall. And it looks like it's still in operation. I went and I looked it up on Google. Looks like they still got some stores in there. I miss malls. I like a deep part of my American existence was spent, my youth and my 20s and my 30s. I spent a lot of time at malls, Birdcage Mall and Citrus Heights and Sunrise Mall. I wish I had spent more time walking around malls. I never thought they would disappear because they're great. They're great. But anyways, most of them are just full of rats or hobos at this point. 2625 Scottsville Road, you can find Greenwood Mall. This is a story that you can investigate yourself if you live out there. Back in the 1980s, they built the prime time to build a mall. They built this giant mall. In 1996, workers at the mall, when they were leaving late one night, the mall used to be open like 24 hours a day, apparently. People have made references about this online. They're like, oh, I remember going to that mall at 3 in the morning. I was like, well, that's pretty crazy. I never had a 24-hour mall. People, customers, employees would be leaving the mall late at night, and they saw this pickup truck in the rear parking lot. But what was odd about it is there was a guy sleeping in the pickup truck. people are going to do it. People are going to camp out like they do it now at Walmarts, driving across America, park your RV in a Walmart parking lot for a day or two. Move on. But the problem is this pickup truck wasn't moving on. Apparently, it was there for a couple days, and the guy was always sleeping in it. So someone went up and they knocked on the window and go, "Hey, buddy, you gonna buy anything? Because if not, you gotta move on." Security guy, he gets called out and he's like tapping on the window. Sir, you can't be here. Sir, you gotta buy something. And even if he did, you can't sleep here for 3 days. He goes and he buys an ice cream cone. He's like, "Oh, that's good enough rent for the next 3 days." Falls back asleep. Sir, I think this man's dead. There's flies all in the car. His bloated corpse cooking in the Kentucky sun. Yeah, I think he's been dead for a couple days, honestly. I can tell by the bodily fluids leaking out of all of his orifices and the fact that he didn't respond when I said sir multiple times and tapped on his window with my billy club. Sure enough, they call the medics, and medics come out here and go, "Oh no, this guy's been dead for a minute." This guy, you guys might want to work on your waking people up policy. I don't know how long you were letting him sleep here, but this guy's ripe. He's taken to the morgue, and they can't figure out how he died. There's no signs of, like, the biggies, right? Knife wounds, bullet wounds. Okay, the coroner says. He puts down his sandwich. He goes, "Now I gotta get inside. Maybe this guy got poisoned. Maybe he had a heart attack. I don't know." So the coroner starts doing the whole investigation. Eventually the cops are like, "Yo, what killed that guy at the mall that we found in the mall?" Coroner goes, "I have no idea. I cannot figure out how this guy died." Now, maybe if he'd been brought to me a little bit sooner, before all of his organs liquefied, it would have had an easier time. But the big issue here is that the fact that there's a decaying body in a car was that the pickup truck was stolen. So the police are able to verify who the pickup truck belongs to, and that guy's still alive. He's like, "Let me just take a quick nap in my car." He's all laying in all the fluid. They're like, no, it's a crime scene. Apparently the pickup truck was stolen. And the guy who originally owned the pickup truck was still alive. But the man dead in the car had no form of ID on him. So they've never been able to verify who this body belonged to. They couldn't verify how he died. They didn't know anything about this man. Shortly after all of this went down, mall security would be hanging out of the mall, hanging out of the food court, eating a bunch of Taco Bell, and all of a sudden, their walkie-talkie, "Shh, Pete, we need your help. Someone in the rear parking lot is saying that their car got broken into and there's some hobo living in it." And Pete's like, "Okay, I'll take care of that." He sits down for another 20 minutes. He's finishing up his chalupa meal. He's like, "Okay, now I have the energy to fight this homeless man who broke into this car." So security would go out to this parking lot in the rear portion of the mall and would see a confused customer being like, "Dude, there's somebody in my car. There's somebody sleeping in my car." And the security guard would be like, "What? That's weird." Walks over and sees, sure enough, there is a man sleeping in the passenger seat of the car. "Wake up, sir, wake up." Security tries to wake him up. He doesn't wake up. Calls the police. Police come out. By the time the police comes out there, the customer and the security guard are looking really, really confused. And the officers are like, "What's happening here?" And security dude goes, "I don't even know how to explain this, but there was a guy who broke into this customer's car and just fell asleep in the passenger seat, and then they just vanished. Not like got out and ran away into the night. They simply ceased to be. They just evaporated." That's way above my pay grade. This apparently has been going on for, it would be decades at this point if this started in 1996. Apparently this happens in this parking lot. If you park, I've heard two different versions. One, if you park in the exact same spot where the pickup truck was and leave your car, if you return to it late at night, there's a chance, right? It's not 100% guaranteed, but there's a chance you'll walk out to your car and you'll see a man sleeping in the passenger seat of your car. Some people say it has to be the exact same spot. Other versions say it's really anywhere in the rear parking lot. You could run afoul of this. You're there late at night. You leave. You come back later. There's a guy sleeping in the passenger seat of the car. And the rumor is that this happens so often. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens enough that the local police have a code for it. They'll say you got a sleeper call. Hey, Barney, Jake, you guys got to go on out to the Greenwood Mall. There's a sleeper. They'll be like, okay. They have to show up. They can't, when someone calls the police department, they can't go like, oh, it's just a ghost, ma'am. Don't worry. This one time might actually be some dude breaking into their car to take a nap. The woman's like, he's driving away now with my baby in the back seat. And the cops are like, maybe we should just check just in case. They say you got a sleeper call. They call him the sleeper. It's interesting, too, because when we break this ghost story down... Well, here's the thing. So it was just last week. I don't remember what the exact episode is. I'll try to find it so I can put it in the show notes. Just last week, I made the proclamation, ghosts very rarely, if ever, appear as a dead body. Ghosts generally will appear... Now I'm having to choose my words a little more carefully. I go, ghosts generally will be a dead person, but be able to walk around or move or something like that. I don't remember what the story was, but it had to do with someone seeing a dead body, and the dead body itself was the ghost. It was like laying on the ground or something like that. It was visibly dead, and then it vanished. I'll try to figure out what episode that was. And then I said that last week. I came across this story. I was like, well, okay, this is what happens when you make broad proclamations. We don't know the answers to so many of these questions about ghosts and paranormal and stuff like that. And that's fine. It's totally fine. I like finding out new information. So now we have two. I'm sure there are more, but... Because that's really the implication, right? It's not that it's the ghost. It's not sleeping still. It's still a dead body. It's still appearing in people's cars. I think it's interesting. He died in the driver's seat of the car, from what I understand. There was... None of the original stories said that he fell asleep in the passenger seat, at least that I saw. But his ghost appears in the passenger seat of your car. It's an odd shift, right? Maybe he was British. Maybe he was British and appears on the wrong side of the car. But that makes it feel more like a passenger in your car than what would be logical. And of course, that word doesn't really matter in the world of paranormal, but you would think that his ghost would appear in the driver's seat of your car. Some people say that it's in one particular spot. Some people say that it can be anywhere in the rear of the mall building, the mall parking lot. It's almost universally decided that it has to happen late at night. There's also a report of, it's his spot because where he was found dead in the pickup truck after they moved everything and over a period. I don't think it was there right away. I don't think the tow truck driver was all, gadzooks! This area is cursed. Apparently, a oil stain that looks like a face has appeared in that parking spot there. No matter how many times they try to wash it off, it doesn't go away. I mean, that could just be an oil stain. That might it's all screaming. It's this guy going, It's like it's super detailed. I'm like, oh, whatever. That's not paranormal. And it would depend, right? If it's just a blob that kind of looked like a human face, then, whatever. But if it was like a man, you clearly see the fear in his eyes as his soul is trapped for eternity. Yeah, I'd say that's probably real. Probably really his soul in the oil. You also have locals saying the story's not true. You have people saying, I worked as a security guard. It's not true. Because people are posting about this on Facebook, and then people are responding to it. Someone goes, the start of the story is true. There was a guy who died in a truck in the back of the mall, but it was a semi, and he died of natural causes. But that setup was real. Now, here's the thing. This is really interesting, because as far as legend tripping goes, as far as ghost hunting goes, this is a relatively safe one to do at first glance. I didn't think about this, because a lot of these stories, they involve you driving out into the middle of nowhere late at night, going down this road and finding the spooky cemetery, and then breaking quite a few laws to get into the cemetery after hours and kind of stomping around. We have stuff like that. If it's a haunted house, especially if it's a privately owned haunted house, you got to break into it. That's as if it's an abandoned haunted house. Don't ever break into a house, families all, they're watching Disney Plus, they're watching Mr. Boogedy, and you come bashing through the door, and you're like, guys, don't worry, I'm here to hunt ghosts. Just to make sure you don't disturb the ghosts, I'm gonna zip tie all of you. There we go. And I'm gonna be in your house for the next 4 to 8 hours. Like, if you're gonna break into a house to do ghost hunting, make sure there's not people there. This one is just going to a mall parking lot. And it looks like this mall's still open. They're not open super late anymore. I think they close around 7. But still, it's not the worst place to go ghost hunting. It's in a relatively safe area that you've probably been to before. Well, some guy posted, I didn't think about this, but this is actually pretty genius. Some guy posted, he goes, you know what, actually, this is the perfect setup for carjackings and car thefts and all that. He goes, imagine this. Somebody comes up with this story saying, okay, so here's how you find a ghost. You got to drive your car into the rear portion of a mall late at night and then leave. And if you come back, there might be a ghost in your car. And you have a group of teenagers being like, dude, let's go to Greenwood Mall. Let's see if we can find the sleeper. The mall's, shut down. It's past 7. The only people in there are probably like maintenance workers or people restocking the place. Pretty desolate. You park your car and you and your friends walk, and you decide to walk the perimeter of the mall, saying, hey, by the time we get back, maybe there'll be a ghost in our car. And you get back and all the windows are busted out. Your stereo's missing. I don't even know if people still steal car stereos. Is that a thing? But all your tires are gone. You know what I mean? It actually, the guy pointed out, he goes, it'd be a perfect trap for burglars. Not to catch burglars, but for burglars to catch you. I thought that's actually pretty ingenious. I'm surprised I didn't come up with anything like that. Although I imagine their boss is like, hey guys, this is a pretty good way to get easy cars, but these cars are all junk. They're owned by teenagers. We're supposed to be stealing Lambos and stuff, or at the very least, a Honda Accord every once in a while. We keep getting, what is it? The car thief's like, I don't even know what type of car this is. I mean, we chop it up for parts, but I mean, like, this come from Bolivia? What is this? What is this car? It's any car a teenager can afford. That's probably the worst car theft ring. But I thought it was interesting. That's why I wanted to cover this one, because I recently said, you never see ghosts of dead bodies. And then I find this one just by happenstance. And also because that's a pretty clever way. I 100% could see somebody coming up with this story to commit crimes. Or at the very least, like maybe part of it is like local legend and then it's hyped up by the thieves. You're like, oh man, I really like ghosts. I'm going to go to this ghost conference and everyone there is all like wearing ski masks. All the presenters are dressed up as mafia dons. You're like, that's kind of weird. It's kind of weird, but I do love ghosts. And they're like, if you leave your purse in your car, a leprechaun will show up. You're like, wow, that's amazing. Honey, go put your purse in the car. I love leprechauns. That'd be great. That would be absolutely great. David, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world famous Carpenter Copter coming to a toy store near you. We're leaving behind Kentucky. Fly us all the way out to Wisconsin. We're headed out to Wisconsin. Specifically, we're headed to a place called Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Eau Claire? I think it's Eau Claire. That would make more sense. Eau Claire. Isn't there a food called an eclair? It's not that. Maybe it is. Maybe it's Eclair, Wisconsin. Who knows? You're like, Google does, Jason. If you typed it into Google, it would tell you. It's 2023, 2024. Pretty recent story, somewhere around there. We're about to meet this young man. We'll call him Steven. He's 18 years old. And his mom and his dad are driving the car, and he's in the back seat. He's like, wowee, look at this amazing state. The amazing state of Wisconsin. Steven's looking out the window as the truck is driving around Wisconsin. And he's like, here's like some folky music. Wisconsin. Delicious eclairs. He's like, wow, this town's so amazing. It has its own theme song right when you drive into town. It's beamed directly into your head. Steven is headed out to Eau Claire, Wisconsin with his family. They just moved to the area. He goes, listen, I grew up in a pretty rural area. But my parents, once I graduated high school, they said, let's go somewhere that's a little more quiet. I don't know what's more quiet than the rural area, right? Well, I guess there's cows and stuff like that. But his parents kind of wanted to live away from people. They liked the nature lifestyle, but they didn't really like having all the neighbors. So they got this huge old house sitting on about 15 acres out in Wisconsin. They were a mile away from the nearest neighbor. And not just that, growing up in a rural area is one thing. Steven said that this 15 acres had a sizable wooded area on it as well. Which wasn't something he was super used to, but he immediately fell in love with. He loved it. He learned really quickly the beauty and the serenity that can come from walking through the woods. And this is basically like his own private piece of the woods. Walking. I'm assuming it connected onto like a bigger forested area. I don't know if it just came to a dead stop at 15 acres. That would be kind of lame, right? It's not really a forest if you can look and see the other side. Like for me, a forest just stretches on and on. If you could walk, like if you're standing at the front of the forest and then you can see through the trees, so there's like a volleyball court and there's a bunch of kids playing tag. It's a park. I'd be like, it's not a forest. This is just a couple trees. I think you need to look and not see nothing. You look through the forest and you just see more trees. But anyways, I don't know if there's a scientific definition of what a forest is. I wonder if it's like there has to be so many trees before a scientist will go, yep, that's a forest. It has trees for X amount of miles. And you're like, okay. Or if it has 30 trees, it's a forest. I don't know. But anyways, Steven, I could Google it. I could fire up the old Google. Take a look. Steven loves walking through the forest. This isn't anything he grew up with. And he goes, it's just so, peaceful. Be walking through. And, now he's in college. And he goes, it was really something to be walking through the woods and seeing nature that had existed long before him. You see these giant trees and their homes to generations after generations of wildlife. You look and you see a bunch of hay bales sitting on a farm. You go, I'm older than those hay bales. That's nothing. But when you walk up to a tree that's 20 years old, and there's a bunch of these old trees, 20 years old minimum, right? He's like, wow, I'm leaning against the tree. He goes, tree, you've been on this earth longer than I have, and you don't seem to have any problems at all. He's being devoured from the inside by mites. He's like, ah! The tree's silently screaming. Steven's like, you know what? This forest has it all figured out. Like, when he walked through the forest, he realized how insignificant his problems were, because here he stood in nature that had been here long before he had, and, over time, it may exist longer than he does, right? Even if he died at 80, he could die in that house and look out the window, and the trees are still growing. New squirrels are being born. A baby squirrel looks at him and gives him a little salute. And then in that delusion, as his brain is overheating, as he's slowly dying, he's like, oh, thanks, squirrel. Salutes him back and dies. However, that peace that he gets walking through this forest is disrupted one day because he is hanging out and all of a sudden, what is that smell? What's that smell? Oh my God, that's horrible. Oh, why do I keep taking such big, deep breaths? One more just to make sure that I have it right. He's smelling rot. But not just rot, it's putrid rot. It's gross. It's like absolutely rancid rot. If you've been around dead things, that's bad enough, but when you can actually smell the decaying process, it's just climbing right up into your nostrils and hanging on for dear life. That's what he's smelling. And then he's kind of trying to figure out where the smell's coming from. Eventually, he sees a half-eaten deer in the woods. He's like holding his nose and he's like, what is that? That deer looks like he got eaten up. He's all poking it with a stick. He's like, yep, these intestines look like they've been chewed. Looks just like SpaghettiOs with hot dogs just pouring out of these open wounds, just super disgusting. And he's like, that's where the smell's coming from. Oh my god, this is awful. He's like poking it with a stick. He's like, look at me, I'm Chef Boyardee. All stirring the guts around. And he starts to think, and he goes, what could have killed this deer? It must have been a coyote, or more likely coyotes. I didn't necessarily know, I don't know if there are coyotes in the woods, but he thought so. And he goes, it must have been coyotes, like a pack of wild coyotes took this deer down. Maybe I should be more careful. But he continues his walks, because you're not going to stop, right? Right? Would that deter you from doing something you love, a half-eaten corpse of rotting flesh? He keeps going for walks, and sure enough, it doesn't happen every day, but every so often he's out on a walk, and he's like, oh, what's that smell? Oh my god. Oh, I know that dead deer was way over there. Why am I smelling it over here? And he's looking, and then, sure enough, he comes across another half-eaten deer. And it's been here for a while. It's been rotten a bit. It looks like thick, greasy beef stroganoff. That's what's left of his guts pouring out of this massive wound. And he's like, oh, disgusting. He just he continues his walk. He just walks till I can't smell it anymore. Every so often he comes across one of these half-eaten deer. You're like, Jason, quit explaining. You're sitting there with a huge plate of Swedish meatballs in front of you. You're like, oh, don't say it look like Swedish meatballs. Don't ruin this for me. He's walking. He's like, oh, what's that smell? What's that horrible smell? It's the smell of putrid, rotting flesh. And he looks and he sees half of a deer. And then strangely, it's meatballs, right? Some Swedish meatballs came rolling out of it. He's like, mamma mia. It's disgusting. He keeps smelling this. Listen, man, I would have given up after the second deer. The first time I smelled the deer, I would have stopped going for walks in the forest. I'd be like, well, there's other acreage here. I'd just walk around in a circle at the front of the house. Keeps coming across these half-eating deers. He keeps going, well, it's just coyotes. Another thing he's putting together with his time here, it didn't happen right away. And he couldn't tell you exactly when it happened, but he did notice one day all of the sounds of nature had fallen quiet. At a certain point, Stephen realized he'd be going out there and there were no squirrels giggling, running from branch to branch. There were no birds chirping their sweet love songs. The marching of ants fell silent. He was walking through a seemingly empty forest. The only sound he heard was the rustling of the leaves and his own feet on the dirt. But that is when, on some of these walks, he would start to hear a new noise. He'd hear something growling somewhere in the woods. So he goes, okay, there's obviously something. I don't have to put two and two together. I could have. Weeks ago, something's eating these deer and leaving most of the carcass. Something's enough of a predatorial threat that even birds and squirrels are not coming out of their holes. If they haven't already all been eaten themselves. But the natural world is detecting such a threat. They've either left or are in hiding or are eaten. And now I'm hearing something that I've never heard before. And it's somewhere in the woods, and I just don't want to deal with it. So he stopped going on his walks. One day, though, he's sitting at home, and he goes, what is in that forest? Like, it really started to get to him. He goes, what in the world's in there? Is it coyotes? Like, would that cause that type of stillness in the natural world? Why am I scared of the woods? My woods, right? We own this part of them. He goes, I don't know what's out there, but I'm really curious. So he gets a trail cam. And he goes, I'm just going to take it out there and I'll set it up. And then in the safety of my own home, I can kind of review and see what it is. Which I'm assuming is going to be coyotes, maybe a bear. but I'm curious as to what it is. So he says, I'm going to go out, and he just, you get a bee in your bonnet where you just really got to get out and do something. He's like, I'm going to do it. He goes and gets his trail cam, and he walks out of his house, and it's close to dusk. The sun's setting. Not the best time to be doing this, but again, sometimes you just got to do it. Got to go figure out what's out there. I'm just going to set this trail cam up and leave. He walks about 100 yards past the tree line carrying this camera. And he goes, this, right here, where I'm at, 100 yards in, this is the perfect place to set up this camera. But Steven, when he wrote this, admits that it really wasn't the perfect place to set it up. He was too scared to keep going. He's like, no, this is, there's a bunch of trees, you can't see anything 2 feet away. It doesn't matter, it's a perfect place to set it up because I'm too scared to go. And he starts setting up the camera and he ends up dropping it, butterfingers it. Gets down on a bended knee to kind of pick it up. He's like, dagnabbit, got to get this camera. And that's when he starts to hear something moving through the forest. The sun's even lower at this point. The darkness is becoming all-consuming, and Steven kind of looks around, and he's still fiddling with this camera, and he can hear something moving. He's like, I just got to get the stupid camera set up. I'll get out of here. Then a familiar smell enters his nostrils. The putrid, rotting smell that he found at the scene of all of these deer slaughters. But as far as he can tell, there's no dead deer here. In fact, when he showed up here, there was no smell at all. The fact that he can smell it now makes him think that this was not an odor created by the prey. This sickening scent was emanating from the predator itself. He's on one knee, right? He's on the ground. He's trying to pick up the camera and get everything to get it set up, and he hears this, and he smells this. He's looking around, he can't see anything. The growl is deep and long and loud. Steven hears a snap of a branch, and he turns and he looks in the darkness. He sees what he could only describe as a, quote, human-like creature coming towards him. He said, humanoid. A head, 2 arms, 2 legs, feet. He could see in the low light of the environment. I hope he brought a flashlight, just so he'd have it, but who knows? I'm sure he did. But anyways, he turns and he looks and he sees this thing. He described it as being a human-looking creature. But it had a few big differences. One, its entire body was charred. It looked like it had been badly burned. That was the first big tell that something was up. I mean, the rotting smell and the half-devoured deer as well. But he goes, I turned and I looked, and its body was charred. It was like if you burned somebody and you just cooked them. It was like throwing a hot dog in a frying pan. Just completely blackened and burned up. On its head, it had a bald head, but it had a few little tufts of hair dotting here and there. That's not super scary. That's just a haircut. But it also, this scary part, right? I don't know why it has to be scary. It's a creature from beyond. We'll get to that in a second. I have a theory about this. He goes, this dude, looked like he'd been horribly burned. He's coming towards me. He smells really, really badly. All that stuff I could deal with. But because he'd been burned so badly, he didn't have any lips. So I could see his mouth completely clearly. He goes, the gums were raw and red. And the teeth, they were incredibly sharp. Almost like little syringes. little needles sticking out of the gums. And there's saliva dripping nonstop out of its mouth as it's walking towards Steven. So Steven goes, okay, I kind of got what I was looking for, right? I'm setting up this camera. She was in the woods. I didn't get the camera set up. I just turned around, and he gets to his feet, and he throws the trail camera at the creature, whatever it is. Again, we'll get to that in a second. I have a theory, but he throws the camera at it and takes off running. And he goes, listen, I was running through that forest as fast as I could, and I felt like I was running for about 20 minutes. But really, it was about less than a minute. I felt like I was just running and running and running forever. But eventually, 60 seconds, he's like, okay, I'm done. And he turns around and he looks, and it's not pursuing him. It may have not even started chasing him to begin with. He could have thrown the trail cam and took off, and it wasn't chasing him anyways. It's definitely not chasing him now. And he is like, okay. So that was the initial burst of adrenaline. I'm sure his heart's still beating 200 times a minute, but now that he knows he wasn't even being pursued by this thing, he's like, okay, so I'm a minute away from where I was previously. I got to get oriented because now I got to find my way home, right? I'm not going to worry about the trail cam. I'm never going to see that again, and I totally am fine with losing a trail cam. I just got to figure out which direction do I want to go to get home. And he's kind of looking around and he goes, okay, if I take this is the shortest path for me to get back to the house. He goes, I'll go this way. And that is when he hears a sound that he could only compare to a horse running top speed through the forest. The loud galloping of feet across the forest floor. Foliage being thrust in every which direction. Something large and fast is moving through the undergrowth, and he hears the sound. He looks. He knows what it is. He knows what's about to happen, but you gotta look anyways. He looks, and this thing, this charred creature, is running on all fours right towards him. Steven knows which direction he's going to go in, and he just starts running in that direction, and this creature is right behind him, and full panic, right? He had a moment of relief there for a second, and this creature was just kind of gathering its strength up, decided to do the jump scare. Steven's running, the creature's running behind him. As Steven's running, his lungs begin to fill with that smell. It's beginning to overpower him, the stench of death that this creature brings with it. And in this moment, Steven realizes, I'm not getting out of this. Like, I'm going to run as fast as I can. I'm not going to give up. But there's a pretty big likelihood this thing's going to kill me. And I imagine as he's running through the dark woods towards the safety of his home, he has to imagine the bodies of the carcasses of all those deers he came across flashing through his head. I imagine he knew full well what was going to happen to him if this thing caught him. When it caught him, Steven knows that he's not getting away. And his body will bloat in the summer sun as this thing continues to devour his body. He's done, right? But, luckily, because someone had to write this, someone had to survive, he goes, I'm running, and right when I said I'm not getting out of this, this is the end for good old Steven, he sees through the tree lines, he sees his house. And because of, he was 100 yards into the woods when this happened, and then he took off in a random direction when he first saw this thing. He goes, I saw the house, but I was still 200 yards from that back porch. I have to finish running through these woods, and then I got a sizable distance across this field. But who knows how fast this thing can run on an open field? I know how fast I can run, and I'm very quickly running out of energy. He goes, I got 200 more yards I could be at my back door, and he sprints. He runs faster than he's ever ran in his life, and he runs, and he reaches that back porch, Opens the door, runs inside. He goes, I shut the door, but I didn't even bother to look out the window. I didn't even want to know where it was at this point. I had evaded it. End of story. I'm never going back into the woods. I just went into the house, shut the door, and never looked back to see how close it actually was. It had been 3 months since that happened, when he sent it to the website phantomsandmonsters.com. It's a great website that covers all sorts of crazy cryptid stuff like this. That's kind of where this story was classified, like, what was this creature? And again, I'll get into my theory. But he goes, it's been 3 months since it happened. He goes, I haven't told anybody. I haven't told any of my friends or my family. They'd think I was insane. Or worse, they'd want to go into the woods and look for it themselves. And I could see that happening. What? No, come on, man. Let's go see. I'll show you that there's not some disgusting humanoid from beyond. Let's go, guys. We're going to hang out at Steven's house Friday night, and we're all going to go in the woods. You wouldn't want to tell people because they would think you were crazy, or they would want to go investigate it just to see if it's real. He goes, I haven't told anyone. He goes, definitely haven't gone back into the woods, right? Nope. Trail cams are gone. I've never gone back. I have no idea what I saw. And I'm curious, but not so curious that I really want to go check it out. He sent it to phantomsandmonsters.com. Now, the headline there was a black charred humanoid encountered in woods near Eau Claire, Wisconsin. But, I mean, that does describe it. I'm not going to say what the headline's wrong. I have a theory about this. And as I was reading this story, that city reminded me, I'm all, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We've not only been there before, I actually have a document that's so long that I haven't been able to really dig into it to do more stories about this particular town. We cover stuff all around the world on this show. And because it's a daily show, we do 2 stories a day. We have been now for going on 6 years. It's actually pretty rare that the same cities pop up over and over again. I mean, obviously something like Los Angeles, but if you think about it, we don't really even go to New York that often on the show. Los Angeles, because it'll be conspiracy, Illuminati stuff, Hollywood stuff, but Eau Claire, Wisconsin, when I was reading the story, I go, I've come across that a couple times. I come across that on my research a couple times. We did an episode about a woman who was at home in 1996. Isn't that when the sleeper died? Actually, that'd be weird, yeah. 1996 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, a woman was at home when all of a sudden this fog started to roll in to her house. It was like this weird mist. And she believes that these aliens are trying to abduct her, which was true. They enter in through her back kitchen door. She sees like a little hand come through the door as the door is opening up and the fog's rolling in. And she hears this voice in her head that said something along the lines of, you know better than to try and resist. And the next thing she knows, she was waking up in her bedroom. So it would imply, obviously, that she's been abducted multiple times. And she tries resisting each time, and each time they get her. Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And then I have, again, I couldn't even give you a Cliff Notes. I'll put that episode I just talked about in the show notes. But I have this massive document about alien activity in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. In fact, they have like a big UFO festival in that area. Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in the surrounding county, is a UFO hotspot. With alien abductions like this one, and again, I have this long I'm going to have to do it eventually because I keep talking about it here. It's alien visitation after alien visitation after alien visitation. It's like this whole case study that was done about this town involving aliens and abductions, and it's just this long sheet. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes, and then I'll cover it at a later time. And Clay, you live in this town, aliens are banging on your door. Like, just post the link if you're not going to do the episode yet. Post the link. What's interesting is Steven. This all happened recently when Steven moved into town. So when he sees something like that in the woods, he's thinking that's a monster, or I don't know what that is, because he may not be aware that this town has a long history of alien interactions. That people are actively being abducted from this area, that UFOs have been sighted for decades over this area. Because what I'm thinking is that this isn't just a cryptid, this could be a crashed alien survivor. Or even worse, you could figure that. That was kind of my first hunch, but then I go, well, I mean, if the place is often visited by aliens, you could just be like, oh man, my alien ship crashed and I'm horribly burned. I'm scarred beyond belief, but I'm pretty sure we were supposed to abduct 10-year-old twins this week. I think I'll just hang out at that house. So you're like dragging your burned body through the forest, and then like eventually you're like in the bushes outside of this family home, and you're like, oh man, I probably should have stopped at the store and got some Tylenol. My skin, it burns. And then, like later on, you're like hiding in the bushes, and then you see these bright lights over your head, and you're like, oh man, thank you. You walk in there, and as the gray aliens are abducting these two kids, you're like, ta-da! You showed up, your body's still like steaming from the burn. They're like, Gleep Glorp, what happened to you? And he's like, long story. Do you mind if I hitch a ride? And they're like, yeah, sure. And they all just go in the spaceship together. And then shortly after that, you hear this panic screams of a mom, my baby, my baby. Also, why does it smell like rotting flesh in here? Could be a crashed alien pilot. I thought too also that, it could just be a cryptid, but the question would be, like, where did it come from? With this type of violent entity in an area that is so full of alien interactions, I don't think they're unrelated. I was like, what if this was some sort of alien experiment gone wrong? Or gone right? Maybe they wanted to turn a normal human into some sort of feral creature. But I think that the two are connected. Could be an escapee from an alien abduction area. This could be the result of an abduction, and this human was horribly disfigured. Or, it's funny too, because I think about it, you could have had a crash, and the aliens die, but some of their cargo, some of their experiments get loose. And while the military, you'd be like, well, Jason, there hasn't been any reports of alien crashes in the past couple years in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Well, I mean, you wouldn't know, obviously. The military would cover it up. But it would explain something like this. Just this pure bestial nature of this entity living in this patch of woods. Could it be a experiment that's gotten loose, and it's doing what it knows what to do, which is to hunt and to survive? I mean, the basic thing that I shouldn't say all, but most living creatures do is the ability to feed themselves. So if you took a normal human, abducted him, was running these experiments on him, and then something went wrong and your UFO crashed, and this guy crawled out with they were literally like drilling into his brain. They're like, oh, it's time for the brain experiments. And someone loses control of the ship and it crashes, and his body, he pulls himself out of the wreckage, burned beyond all recognition. He's a beast at this point. He's killing anything he can to feed himself. Interesting theory, right? We don't know for sure. This is one you can go investigate for yourself and just travel around Eau Claire, Wisconsin, look for a big old house that's attached to 15 acres of wooded area. Because this is about as recent as you can get, right? 2023, 2024, if you live in this area. You could theoretically find this patch of woods and go for a hike. I just want to let you know I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it on illegal reasons because it's trespassing. I don't recommend it also because you might get eaten. But you may go, you know what, Jason, I'm not worried about either of those things. I think I'll be just fine. In fact, you say, I think that the story is made up. And to prove you wrong, Jason, I am going camping there tonight. You book a plane, you're like listening to this podcast in Mexico, you're like, let's go. You book a plane, you come up to Eau Claire, you drive around, and you happen to find it. You're like, wow, that was surprisingly easy. You go, this story's not true, so I'm not worried about anything. In fact, I'm going to make a viral video where I'm saying Jason Carpenter is a liar. People are like, what? Who's Jason Carpenter? Why are you making this video? You're doing TikTok dances in the woods. It's like, Jason Carpenter is a liar. You want to prove me wrong, and that's fine. That's totally fine. You could. You totally have your right to do that. However, I would be careful. Whether or not you believe the story, if you're ever walking through the woods in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and you come across a trail cam sitting on the forest floor, maybe you just happen to be standing in the woods where this creature roams free. You thought you were going to disprove that this story ever happened. But as that creature is ripping your guts out, and you're screaming in pain, I didn't know it was true. And this creature is just like pulling at your guts. He's making you do a little Pinocchio dance. I have no strings to hold me down. He's like playing with you, body. You're all, and he just ate your legs, right? And this is how he entertains himself. After he eats the lower half, he plays with the upper half, and he's making you do Pinocchio dances and stuff like that. And you're like, and you're still alive because somehow when this guy eats you, you don't die immediately. And you're like, I can feel everything. My nerve endings work. And he's like making you dance through the woods. Just remember when that happens. Because it may. We don't know. Just remember when that happens. You thought you were going to disprove that this story ever happened. Instead, you just became another meal. Yes, there's all these victims right now. There's a huge dance montage. All these half-eaten deers in different states of decay. You're still aware. You still haven't died yet. You're like, huh? What? You're on like a stage. This cryptid has like an underground base where he puts on performances for aliens and stuff like that. It's so bizarre. I'm all in the audience. I'm clapping. The creature's like, look at my collection of dead things. Dun, dun, dun. Know the rest of the words. He's looking at the band leader. Band leader's shrugging his shoulder. Band leader's just a decayed deer that happens to still be alive somehow. Hey everyone, look at this amazing show I have featuring you. And you're still this marionette puppet. You're like, no, I want to die. Please let me die. And he's like, nope. We're taking this show on the road. We're going all across the galaxy. You're going to be alive this whole time. You're like, I'm all laughing in the audience. I'm all, A creepy, if nonsensical ending, deadrabbitradio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at facebook.com/deadrabbitradio. TikTok is at deadrabbitradio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one.